everyone. Before I start, I wanted to get an idea of like show of hands of who is familiar with Web3 and like knows anything at all about it. Okay, well, you also know a little bit about Web3, right?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, okay, cool. What about you, Rosanna?
I don't just like the but I've been going to some events
Okay.
lately, and that's the idea.
Okay, so some idea. Okay, cool. Yes, so I'm gonna go through, well, the title of the presentation is Realities and Challenges of Running a Web3 Business, which is kind of great because I've been running a Web3 business for 3 years now. And there's yeah, it's been a long and interesting experience. So I'm very happy to be able to share it with all of you. So a little bit about me. My name is Nicole. I founded Vertical Crypto Art 3 years ago, actually a little bit more than 3 years ago. And before this, I was actually working at Facebook and Instagram for 7 years. And I got into Web3. I discovered actually blockchain through art, for blockchain-based art through friends of mine, artists who were using blockchain as kind of like a way to sell their work and to showcase their work. And yeah, I found it really interesting and really exciting. And yeah, I decided to kind of like take the plunge out of corporate life, which I wasn't enjoying very much at that point anymore, and start a business. Or actually, it wasn't a business when I start a project, and then it became somewhat of business, let's say. So Vertical Crypto Art is a Web3 platform for art and culture on the blockchain. What that means is that we provide an ecosystem for artists, like your usual definition of an artist. It can be a fashion designer, it can be a poet, it can be a musician, where we have a platform where we sell blockchain-based art, so NFTs, non-fungible tokens. We also run a online residency program for artists and creators and kind of like curious, let's say, individuals, which covers a very I would say vast curriculum about the Web3 art and culture space. And we run a series of events and exhibitions pretty much, I would say, all over the world. One of them, as Chris was saying before, is a festival that we launched last year called Proof of People, which actually happened here in London at Fabric, which is formerly a nightclub, but we kind of made it into a day and night festival of 3 days. Which brought in actually art, music, and fashion all through the lens of Web3, blockchain, metaverse, etc. Yeah, so just briefly what I'm going to chat about today, just a kind of like an introduction of what it means to start a business, start a project, realities of setting up a Web3 business, challenges, overcoming those challenges, or how to potentially overcome those challenges, and then just time for Q&A and questions, because I'd love to also learn more about all of your projects, and I'm sure you have lots of questions for me. So Web3 is, I would say, like a definition of Web3 is when a company, a platform, an ecosystem utilizes blockchain in a decentralized manner to power whatever it is that they're doing. And the underlying tech of Web3 is blockchain technology. It's definitely an opportunity for a lot of businesses to use Web3 and to use blockchain technology to power their ideas and to power their business strategy. Here I kind of like showcase some examples of like different companies from like Web2 to Web3. So a very simple example would be like Dropbox. I'm sure everybody knows about Dropbox. Dropbox is a centralized storage system. Filecoin is a company that utilizes decentralized storage. So essentially utilizing like Python and IPFS you own your data. So you own whatever it is that you're putting on Filecoin. Similarly, you know, there's a few other examples. LinkedIn and Facebook. We have District, Virtual Words, which I'm sure a few of you are familiar with. Decentraland. Decentraland is a metaverse ecosystem, which basically is essentially a virtual world. Utilizes blockchain to power their virtual Earth, let's say. There's a few different kind of like examples of Web3 businesses. One of the probably the most familiar and recognized one is NFTs. It's probably the kind of the area of Web3 that went more into mainstream, especially mainstream media, primarily and somewhat unfortunately because of the capital that was made and the money that was made through by a selected number of people trading NFTs. Something that is also, I think, important to consider is that the base of blockchain and how people interact with blockchain and utilize blockchain and trade blockchain is via cryptocurrencies. I would say the main cryptocurrencies that most people are aware of are Bitcoin and Ethereum, but there's many more that power a lot of these Web3 like ecosystems, such as Tezos, such as Polkadot, such as Algorand, and many more. There's also a an interesting areas of exploration within the Web3 ecosystem that focuses more on protocols and governance, which is particularly interesting also for you and your idea and what you have, or things that I think about when you were talking about your idea. And so how can blockchain and how can blockchain essentially power governance models, voting systems, and so on and so forth. And then the last is DeFi, which is decentralized finance, which is basically the way that people trade right now in centralized finance is by buying stock, which is centralized by centralized exchanges and centralized banks. With decentralized finance, you are trading cryptocurrencies or other kind of like stocks, but in a decentralized manner. So nobody is really owning your money. It's decentralized in different protocols. Of course, with any new ecosystem and any new space, it brings up a lot of like new realities and just new kind of like new opportunities that arise. I think here I kind of went into explaining a little bit like what a Web3 business, what it is a Web3 business and what it entails being a Web3 business. So obviously not all of this is necessary to be in Web3, but these are kind of like the base of what the Web3, let's say, dream could be. So decentralization and trust. So the idea of a Web3 is based on decentralized models and decentralized systems. What that means is that you are essentially like sharing power, sharing sharing power and sharing kind of like even the way that information is shared via a lot of different entities. And in its core, cryptocurrency and blockchain is a trustless ecosystem, which means that no smart contract, so the technology that lies behind blockchain and Web3 is a trustless ecosystem. So nobody is saying, you know, you need to trust me to store that information on your Google Drive, or you need to trust the bank to have that money and keep that money safe. It opens up an opportunity for new economic models. For sure, tokens are an example of new economic models. NFTs are an example of new economic models. And the way that businesses can utilize these tokens and can utilize these new economic models to essentially raise money, sell art, sell digital fashion, and so on and so forth. What this kind of like this space also brings is user ownership and control, and it kind of is connected to the first bullet point. But essentially, the promise of blockchain is that user has control over anything that is shared on the blockchain. So as I said before, there is this kind of like I'll do an example. An artist is using NFTs, so is minting their work, is producing work and putting it on the blockchain. The artist owns that data, owns that piece of art, owns that digital file. And it's stored in the blockchain, hopefully in a decentralized manner. Obviously, there's a lot of potential for disruption. I think we're seeing it already. We have a lot of examples that are being brought from the Web3 ecosystem. The art world has been, I would say, the first kind of like vertical and the first industry that has really seen this disruption, even in the real world, like in the contemporary art world. Just before I was talking to Kate, and she was like, "Oh, but was it an NFT that was sold last week for 6 point whatever million at Sotheby's?" Yes, it was. So since probably 2021, March 2021, when Christie's had their big Beeple sale, the kind of like the word of NFTs, the word of Web3 has been talked about a lot in the contemporary art world. A lot of galleries, a lot of, I would say most actually, auction houses are adopting in some way or the other NFTs and kind of entering the digital art ecosystems in a more vibrant way. So it has definitely disrupted, it is definitely disrupting a lot of like industries. I think probably the second kind of industry that I've seen quite a bit of disruption, I think this year and the end of last year, is fashion actually. Even high luxury brands like Louis Vuitton or Givenchy or Dolce & Gabbana have introduced in some shape or form NFTs and Web3 into their like business model. I'm sure a lot of you have heard that now, you know, there are actual like job roles like head of Web3 or, you know, head of like digital innovation, which essentially is trying to understand how can businesses utilize this technology in their current models. But then again, the disruption also happens from the ground up. So ecosystems like ours, or I'll go into a lot of examples, but you know, there's a lot of like smaller kind of like startups and businesses that have in whatever kind of like shape or form disrupted this kind of like the standard way that, you know, businesses are made or people are used to see businesses. Also the very interesting part about Web3 is this focus on community and user participation. It's key to blockchain and it's key to you know, the ideals of blockchain, and it's very, I would say it's very present in the Web3 industry as a whole. This is, it kind of takes different forms, but essentially one of the, I would say, probably most funniest thing about Web3 is that a lot of the ecosystem lives and breathes on Twitter, which of course doesn't make any sense because Twitter is like a Web2 centralized platform. But for some reason, that's what is happening. And even though, you know, Twitter is obviously owned by Elon Musk, and you know, it's definitely not, doesn't include any decentralized kind of like ethos, but it allows for communities to be created and for users to have a lot of voice and say into what businesses are doing. And this is quite it's actually kind of also a challenge for businesses, because for the first time you have this direct kind of like interaction with your audience, with potentially your customers, with your clients, with your haters. So it creates definitely a sense of community, and at the same time a shift of mindset that businesses have this direct communication which they need to listen to. immediately as well. So it's very fast paced, and I experience this, daily. We experience this daily, and a lot of the bigger brands as well that came into Web3 also experienced it, and it's been kind of funny to see actually, because for the first time, somebody like like Louis Vuitton or Givenchy had to deal with like comments on Twitter and had to like change their model or their activity or their business plan accordingly to what the users were saying, which you can't really see in a, it's not like I go into Louis Vuitton and I'm like, oh, sorry, I don't like the way you disposed your shop. And they're like, yeah, good, like go away, leave. But actually with this kind of like idea of a community, a sense of community that has been built on Twitter, online for these Web3 communities, they have has created almost a sense of like power of community in changing certain things and certain ways that businesses are operating. And then the last is, of course, like experimentation and evolution. I think it's, as I said, it's a new space. It's nobody really, like I'm giving this talk about, what are the challenges and the realities because from my experience. But at the same time, it's a completely new ecosystem and a completely new, a completely new space. So a lot of it is still very experimental. Everybody is experimenting. Everybody's trying, testing, and learning. Some of it, some people might have done it for 3, 4, or 5 years. Others are just starting. At the same time, it's in constant evolution. And so even as a business owner and entrepreneur, it's, I think, one of the most important things to consider is that as much as, it is a space of, it is an interesting space, and it is new. And so everything changes very quickly. And this kind of like, you need to be able to adapt to changes very, very quickly. And there's no right or wrong as well. So, there's as much that needs to be done that it has already been done. So there's a lot of like white, blank, open space. Yeah, which kind of leads into my next slide quite well. There's I think, like, in terms of challenges and what things to consider, of course, like the Web3 space is a tech space. Like the base of what what powers Web3, as we said, is blockchain. And so there are a lot of challenges, technical challenges, that surface when you're working in this space and when you own a business in this space. I would say the first actually thing, even before scalability and operability, is to be able to have a Web3 business, you have to interact and you have to either work with developers or be a developer. You have to know, at least in somewhat, what is the ecosystem that you're going to be building on. And so there's a lot of tech infrastructure that is needed to operate a Web3 business, whether you're trying to build a digital fashion marketplace, I'm going to call it like this, or you're trying to build, a new form of an art gallery, or you're even trying to build a DAO. There's a lot of like tech infrastructure that is needed. And so, either you work with talents, like you work with people that know about this, and actually, I would say that there's quite a limited pool of people that know how to navigate blockchain and smart contracts and all of this very well. Or you also, start learning about it as well. I kind of did a little bit of both. The way that I started was the way that actually I kind of like started to understand how I could build vertical crypto art was learning about blockchain myself. So listening to a lot of podcasts, talks, workshops. I was lucky, I would say, enough to find one of my good friends that then became almost immediately my business partner, who has a background in engineering, but at the same time he knew nothing about blockchain. So we kind of like learned together how to build this ecosystem. And obviously now we also have a team of developers, and at the same time, even the developers sometimes are still learning with you. So it's there's a technical infrastructure that is needed, and that also somewhat of a technical knowledge, or at least finding people that have that technical knowledge. And then, of course, there's, you know, the ecosystem, as I said, is still so new that the scalability of this technology is somewhat still limited. I think anybody who has had an experience in buying an NFT or interacting with Web3 can say that the experience is not easy or pleasant. And that there's a lot of steps that need to be followed to be able to interact with this ecosystem. Yes, there are like certain players that are facilitating these models, like buying with fiat, so like normal cash, dollars, pounds, whatever. But if we think about like building a real Web3 business, the education part and the user interaction, the user experience is still a massive problem. And it's also why, we were talking just before, like the pool of people that are interacting with this space, really interacting with this space, is still small. Realistically, it's still very small, which is also an issue of user adoption. So yes, the tech is great. Yes, the ideas are wonderful, but the education is still limited. Like I think, Chris, you were saying at the start, this is probably one of the only universities, or few universities, that are talking about, that are having these types of conversations and workshops, and not many people are. So in order to, the first step into user adoption is education, right? If you don't know what you're going into, how can you adopt a technology? And that's kind of also what we try to do with the residency, is really to educate people on how they can use this technology for whatever it is that they're trying to do. So these are very important challenges that are still not solved in any way. And then experience as well, like as I said before, the experiences are messy, they're fragmented. It doesn't ease people into it. And yeah, that's an issue. Funding and sustainable business models. I would say that that's a challenge of any startup. It's definitely not something like specific to Web3. But I think what is quite specific to building a business within the Web3 ecosystem is that many times you're reliant on cryptocurrencies. And cryptocurrencies are very volatile currencies, digital currencies. And it is a very volatile market in general. So if I think about our experience in building, let's say like a Web3 ecosystem and gallery and selling art via cryptocurrencies, it happens that 1 year you're doing really, really well, and not even 1 year, 1 day, 1 month, 1 week you're doing very well, and then the next week, for whatever reason, whether it's somebody tweeting something about Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever cryptocurrency you're based on, it crashes. And so the market is very volatile, and of course, whilst with a Web2 or a normal business, you're based on a kind of like the pound or the dollar or the euro. If you're basing your income and your business model on crypto, you have to consider that it's quite volatile, and have to face that as well, and kind of like have a plan for that too. As I said before, it's a very fast-paced ecosystem. I mean, I come from tech. I've worked in tech for 11 years, but this is like another level of fast-paced because of the user participation, because of how much the technology is advancing, because of how much people are part of your business, really. And so businesses have to constantly be changing according to also what the community is saying, and also because everybody's testing and trying, and some things work, some things stick, others don't, and so it's like everybody's looking at what everybody else is doing and then trying to learn from each other. And it's ever evolving right now. There's no really right or wrong, and you need to adapt that, which sometimes is actually really difficult, because you kind of want to, you as a business owner, you want to have some key pillars that are fundamental to growing the business, but at the same time, it might happen, and it's happening, to us as well many times, that you have to really like completely shift and change, and pivot because of, for example, like an example now is cryptocurrencies are quite low at the moment. The market is considered what is considered a bear market, so a market where not a lot of sales are being made. As a business owner that primarily sells art to sustain the business, you have to think about other ways in which you're going to fuel your business model, right? If not, you don't have a business anymore. So right now, we're going into, like, we're thinking about how can we sustain the business via different ways that is not solely reliant on, selling art or on cryptocurrencies. And then the last is it's highly competitive. Even though there's not a lot of, I would say now it's like a reasonable amount of players. Everybody's very hungry, whether it's like artists that are hungry, whether it's like designers that are hungry, whether it's entrepreneurs, whether it's DAOs, like everybody is hungry to kind of like be the next big thing, because it's such a new space. And so it's almost like, a lot of people compare it to when the internet started. I don't know, because I wasn't old enough to see it, but it's a space that fuels a lot of ideas, but at the same time it's a competitive ecosystem. And so I think a challenge for me as a business owner is trying to look at competition, see it, but at the same time not let it kind of like overcome everything that you're doing, because at one point you find yourself almost like chasing others rather than like building what your idea is and what your business is. So I think I kind of like touched on it a little bit, but how can you overcome these or mitigate these? I think I kind of touched on it in the last slide, but I think being in the know is the best thing you can do from all levels. Especially like right now, we're still at a moment where, blockchain is not kind of like powering things so that people don't notice that it is. So for example, you write your emails, you don't really know how the email system works, right? Like you just write the email and it happens. That's hopefully what, will be blockchain in the future. But right now we're still in such an experimental and nascent space that the more you know about this ecosystem, the technology, smart contracts, DAOs, governance, protocols, the better you're positioned for whatever it is that you want to create or you want to build. And it's important to do your own research, really. Whether it's like doing your own research about companies that exist in your same idea or your same ecosystem, but also do your own research on like what is blockchain, like who invented Bitcoin, like read the Bitcoin white paper. These are like really, apart from the fact that they're really interesting, it also like fuels a lot of can fuel a lot of ideas and can direct the way that you shape your business as well. For me, like one of the most interesting things that I did before I started, during my kind of like process of starting BCA, was to listen to a lot of Vitalik's podcasts. So Vitalik Buterin is the guy that invented Ethereum, and he's done a lot of different talks with a lot of different people. And it's very interesting to hear from him directly, like what fueled him to invent, Ethereum, which is essentially what is powering most of Web3. Similarly, I read the Satoshi's like white paper. It's really simple, actually. You think it's going to be really complicated, but actually he explains it so well. They explain it so well because we don't know who they are. So I think it's interesting and it's exciting to actually learn about this area. And the best thing that you can do is really diving into this ecosystem and learning about it. And people can say a lot of things, but doing your own research is the best for me that you can do. Another part is actually focusing on applications of blockchain and Web3 with an impact in real life. I think like this, I actually don't even have to say this because all of you are thinking about it, which is great. But we were talking what we were discussing before, and I think also why kind of like Web3 or crypto has almost a bit of a negative connotation and has had a negative connotation within the mass media and the outside world is that there's been a lot of focus on essentially people making money. And that's the least interesting thing about blockchain and Web3, really. Unfortunately, it's what's been happening a lot. But at the same time, it's kind of like a very limited amount of people that are making a lot of money. And then the whole other like 90% of the ecosystem that is not really. What is interesting, I think, and what has been interesting, for us, for example, when we started the residency, is how can we kind of like use, our somewhat experience and like our, community that we created to inform others and to give access to like artists, people, anyone really, about all of these like areas of blockchain and Web3. How can we inform? How can we help artists understand how they can access this new art market or access this new market in general, to be able to do their work. And I think like this for me was like the core idea behind the residency. Like it's a free program. It's accessible anywhere to anyone. The idea is to really help communities worldwide, not just our kind of like, we live in London, we're almost like very facilitated to know about these things. We have access to a lot of things. Actually, what for me was most interesting is understanding and learning about all of the artists that are in many places in the world where they don't really have access to a gallery, a museum, a university, and understanding how they can utilize blockchain and how they can utilize and make use of Web3 to fuel their creativity, to sell their art, and to maybe even, help their families. And we've seen a lot of examples with this, with the program. And I think thinking more about like how can blockchain have an impact in real life is what will bring the ecosystem forward, rather than thinking about how you can make the most profits out of selling that NFT or milking kind of like your way into the ecosystem. And it's going back to like being the know and doing your own research is kind of also what you will hear and understand when you read and understand why blockchain was created at all, and why it exists on any level. And I think that's what a lot of people actually don't know. And yeah, that's kind of like more philosophical, but it's kind of like focusing on applications, and I think a lot of you are already, so that's great. Build sustainably. I mentioned this already. So with this, I actually think it's on two ways. I think a lot of like startups or a lot of businesses have this need to, I think it's kind of like also based on this kind of capitalistic idea that we have, that as soon as you have a business and you have a bit of money, you have to scale. Like, yes, it's, go for it. Like hire 20 people and, and it's actually sometimes like not the most, not the best for you and for your business and for your idea. We have experienced personally within VCA that smaller teams are much more impactful, and that a lot of the time it takes few people doing really good work rather than kind of like going in and scaling after your first year or your first month or your first 6 months, even if you have raised a lot of money and if you have raised a lot of capital and if you have, you know, a lot of money in the bank. It's very hard to manage big businesses and to manage teams. I think that's the first thing I learned as an entrepreneur, is that managing people is the hardest thing that you will find. And so sometimes like thinking about how to build sustainably, you know, like slowly and little steps, and understanding where are the areas that you need to build will help you financially, first of all, but also operationally, like in general, even as an entrepreneur, like thinking about where you want to go and being able to also like change and shift and experiment. It's much easier when it's, I think, lean, like the system is leaner. And yeah, the last part is, yeah, don't be afraid to change and pivot, especially within this Web3 ecosystem. It'll probably be, you know, something that happens probably even across these 3 weeks. You might, you know, start with an idea that we kind of like shared now, and then slowly think about how that could be sustainable, whether it's possible at all, whether you need to change, whether you need to integrate different things. And that will probably happen along the process of even having a business and starting a business. And I mean, for me, it's quite scary because I'm quite like, you know, a bit OCD and like scheduled. So it's hard to pivot, but it's important. And I think it's part of also being in such a new ecosystem and space. Yeah, here I just kind of like shared some examples of Web3 businesses, and I'll share this presentation so you can have it and keep it as well. You can kind of go and look at them. But the Fabricant is, I know you're familiar with them already. You guys are probably familiar with them, but they are a digital fashion ecosystem, I would say, because they're not really just a marketplace. Yes, they do sell NFTs in the form of like digital fashion, but they are also an innovation hub, let's say, for digital fashion designers. And actually, the way that they started was completely non-commercial at all. They were just kind of like experimenting with what it means to create digital garments and how can they facilitate other digital fashion designers or fashion designers at all to utilize the kind of like the tech side of fashion to create digital fashion garments. And then they kind of like went into doing collaborations and commercializing their idea as well. Manifold is again a Web3 business that essentially empowers and creates tools and toolkits for artists and creators to build on blockchain. This is building smart contracts. This is minting NFTs. This is creating Web3 decentralized applications. Yeah, it's a very interesting actually platform, which I would recommend, especially if you're thinking about you know, like a marketplace or smart contracts and so on and so forth, to look into. We talked about VC residency. Sandbox is a virtual metaverse, virtual world. They've built essentially an ecosystem similarly to Decentraland and Spatial that allows for people to own land in the metaverse, both from like an actual real estate side of things, but also for people to build experiences in the metaverse as well. Artblocks, is anybody familiar with Artblocks? No, okay. So Artblocks is a Web3 business and platform and marketplace that has allowed for generative artists, so artists that are creating art with code, through code, to do so with the blockchain, basically. So it's actually quite I mean, they were, when I go back to like focusing on applications with a Web3, like focusing on applications with an impact in real life. They essentially, the creator, Eric Calderon is the name of the founder, allowed for the whole like ecosystem of generative art to have a space in the Web3 ecosystem. And so historically, like generative art has been around for decades, but there was never really an easy way to market generative art. So you would have to like print it, and you would have to have the code in a USB stick. With art blocks, what they created was a way for artists to input the code on the blockchain, and then for people to be able to mint and buy generative art, so even like long form generative art immediately and instantly. And yeah, it was quite a big innovation, and a really big shift for the creative coding community as a whole, worldwide, globally. And then the last one is actually a gallery that is based in London. They're called ArtSect. They're actually set up as a DAO. So it's something that is, I would definitely also look into it, especially because the founder, called Mickey, is very knowledgeable about governance and governance models, and so definitely something to look into. He actually writes a lot of different blog posts as well on Medium, which I have learned from a lot myself. And yeah, they're set up as a DAO, so they kind of like work with artists, with curators. They do a lot of digital fashion exhibitions as well. They're based in Hackney Wick, and yeah, they're great. So it's definitely one to look, especially because we're all based in London, and all of their events are usually free and open to anyone. Cool. And yeah, any questions or thoughts or anything at all, really, I'm happy to share more.
I'll just say that was amazing. That was just such a covered everything. But yeah, that was fantastic. Is there any questions?
So vertical crypto art is the business model for vertical crypto art is based on three main things. One is selling art. The second is because the residency is completely free, we have grant models that are funding the residency, which allows us to support the residents, support the mentors that are teaching all of these classes, and support us as well, so the team that is managing the residency. And then the last is we do some work as consultancy and advisory, and that is what is helping us and has helped us actually in the past to navigate these kind of like lower market trends. This is something that I would say is not my favorite part of the business. So if it was for me, I would be, doing art exhibitions and the residency just, as a whole. Working for clients is, somewhat can be daunting. But again, it's kind of like what can fuel us doing exhibitions, what can fuel us supporting more artists, what can fuel the residency, and so we do that as well. And actually, it's quite interesting as well, because in a way it helps us understand how like bigger brands or like bigger Web2 ecosystems are thinking about Web3 and what they're not thinking about, mostly, I would say, and kind of like shapes the way that we think about our business model as well. So it's even though it's it's not like the most fun and exciting part of what we do, it has its benefits and its perks, and yeah. So that's kind of like the three main let's say ways that we generate revenue. Yeah.
Can I follow up on that? Is that okay? So I would imagine that you get paid in money for this one.
Yes.
So
Real money.
Real money in that one, and then crypto in this one, yeah?
Yeah, kind of both, because we actually support fiat, so like normal currency as well, by selling art. So the way that we like, we've always kind of like tried to position ourselves, yes, as a Web3 like ecosystem, but very integrated within like the contemporary art scene. So we've always worked immediately after COVID, basically, we started doing exhibitions in real life. And that helped a lot. First of all, people kind of like understanding a little bit more what we were doing and what the ecosystem was, but also us having a presence in the real world and not just online. And with that, we obviously like realized that there is still a need for integration of normal payments, fiat payments, and so on and so forth. So that's a bit of both, I would say, but primarily like 80% is crypto for selling art. So we were talking about just before, everything like at the moment, DAOs and governance is basically only based on capital power.
Exactly.
That's it. There is very little that is being done to actually implement like further protocols that could power, you know, voting tools that are not based on how much I spend or how much I own, but more like, I don't know, how much I participate, for example, how much I care, you know. One example actually that I would recommend you looking into is DADA, DADA, and they have introduced a concept of governance that actually relies on a concept that they introduced, which is called the invisible economy. There's a really wonderful article on Medium about if you just type in Google, the invisible economy data, you will find it. And I would really recommend reading it because I think it will help you shape a lot what you're thinking about. So there are certain ecosystems that are trying to, actually, like as Vertical Crypto, we're also building a bit of a protocol on that side of things, on the governance side of things, that is not strictly related to power, like capital power at all, but it's still very experimental. I think right now what we're seeing is that there are a few ecosystems that are building new, like actually really interesting ways to utilize blockchain for, like, really why is blockchain created? So decentralization, trustless systems, more meritocratic models, and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, they get kind of like overshadowed by capital and capital power mostly. And that's also what you hear about most, you know, like the only thing you hear about really about crypto is money, right? Nobody even knows why Bitcoin was invented. Like realistically, very few people know, which was, you know, peer-to-peer transaction without a centralized ecosystem. That's why Bitcoin was invented. So I think it needs more people like you and, you know, to fuel these ideas and to bring them to happen, you know. Even if I think about, like, a lot of people are annoyed that museums are not interested in NFTs, right? Or a lot of museums are not interested in NFTs. And, you know, speaking to a lot of museums, like, they don't see a value yet in, you know, associating themselves with NFTs, because it's not like digital art is started with, you know, Web3 or started with NFTs. Like, digital art has been around for decades. So what is more interesting maybe for like these sorts of like ecosystems is, for example, generative art, because generative art is something that actually there has been an innovation from, you know, the Web2 ecosystem to the Web3 ecosystem in how it is created and how it is minted and how people can experience it. Or blockchain-based art, for example, like people actually utilizing smart contracts to create work. So this is like when I think it's important that there is more of like a, I would say, like institutional interest, research coming in, because I think that's what will hopefully change a little bit the narrative and the way that people are seeing and doing and building in Web3. I mean, like, for example,
aren't they the people with the power? So there's more likely to be direct.
I wouldn't say people with power. I think it's people with, I mean, for sure they have some sort of power, but I also think it's like right now the ecosystem is really centralized into like, I don't know, 200 people with a lot of money, right? And they're just constantly trading, you know, and all they care about is making more and more money. So for example, like since we started a residency program, I have not yet seen another residency program like ours, which already tells you that because we don't have any commercial purpose in doing the residency. We literally get zero. We have a lot of like other incredible things that the residency gives us, which for me is enough, but it has no commercial value. So we don't make any money. And I've always wondered, you know, why has no ecosystem within the Web3 space decided to focus their interest and kind of like space money in education? Because there's no money to be made. And obviously, you know, it's the more people, you know, it's kind of a bit of a, I don't have an answer basically, but I think the more people are asking these questions like yours and trying to build protocols and infrastructure to address these issues, the better it is.
So I'm writing up a do your own research, let this deep learn,
Yeah.
the data Bitcoin white paper and Italic podcast.
Vitalik, VI, yeah, VI, yeah.
Is that right? Is that right?
With a K at the end.
Podcast. Are there any other, to build on your idea, are there any other things that could?
Yes, I would also look at ArtSect. There's
That's the one that you have up there. That's in
I'll share the presentation anyways. ArtSect, they have really like worked and thought a lot about governance. So there's a lot of interesting reads on that.
Anything else that you also want to?
And another one is VCA residency. So we have like VCA residency. We have a ton of all of the classes and all of the workshops that we do in the residency are online on YouTube for free. Like there's over, I would say, 80 plus classes, probably around 150 hours of content, really about mostly on the art and culture space, but there's classes on smart contracts, on DAOs. Actually, Mickey from ArtSect is one of our mentors. He does a class every cohort. So there's really like a lot of information on there. So I would also recommend digging into that.
My question is like, you heard their ideas and they're great ideas, really exciting and quite like some capitally and not non-capitally. If you were to give a, like, I know that the first point of call is to do your research and to learn, but is there kind of like, my understanding of what you said is do your research, learn, but you might need to find a developer, and because really if you're going to start this, you need to find a developer. Is that, or do you, like if you were them and you were to start again, what would be your first step?
My first step was researching and educating myself as much as I could.
And then?
And then it was finding somebody that wanted to do it with me.
Right.
Finding somebody that was, to be honest, quite crazy enough to do so, because it was 2020 and nobody was speaking about NFTs. Mm-hmm. Now it's a little bit easier. And just like Vertical Crypto Art didn't start as a business. It was a project. I was actually still working in my full-time job when I started it. So it wasn't even commercially sustainable when I even left Facebook. So it really started as a Twitter account, as an educational project. So for me, it's a bit different because like I didn't start it with the idea of like making a business out of it. Like really.
Is that a good idea though? Because that means that you sort of started it with.
Yeah, I mean, it's my first, like, I'm not a, I don't come from, it's my first business ever. And you learn a lot when you're a first time entrepreneur. So looking back, probably maybe I would have maybe like created more of a business plan. But at the end of the day, it worked for me. But I think like my biggest thing is I researched a lot, and I keep doing that for even now. Like I spend a lot of time learning about the ecosystem and seeing what other people are doing and like trying to, even something that helped me a lot is translating what I was doing to my parents and people that have like no idea about this ecosystem and hearing their questions to me, because that helped me a lot to understand, what it is that I'm doing and how I can do better. And so it's, for me, the biggest thing is just educating yourself. But I'm a big proponent of education. So I think that helps a lot.
So how much has changed?
A lot. When we started, we were doing just content. So content on Twitter. Basically, we were doing like videos, like short videos that were like basically curatorial videos. So I was like looking at the wider kind of like art ecosystem, which at the time was not very wide. It was quite small because there were not a lot of artists. And like selecting work that I enjoyed, that I liked, and kind of like doing these videos and saying, hey guys, this is like 10 works that I really enjoyed looking at, and like talking to the artists and knowing more about their work. And that's how we started. Then we started doing loads of like artist interviews, so live streams on YouTube. So even on our YouTube channel, there's loads of like interviews with probably like 50 artists of different backgrounds, of different practices. So at the start, it was content. Then we started working with like companies. So like we started working with a lot of the platforms doing curation for them. Then we built our auction platform. Then like it's changed a lot. I don't know if it's changed. It kind of evolved. I don't think it's changing. It's just evolving. Yeah, so a lot, like many. I think the only thing that stayed constant since we started was the residency, which I think means, like, to me is actually really important that it has, because it means that it works, like it should stay there. Obviously we changed, we adapt the program, we add classes, we add mentors, it changes in that sense, but the core fundamentals of it have stayed the same.
And that goes back to community, right?
Yeah.
Just in a way, what's lovely about the residency is that there's that sense of ownership and community that keeps reinventing itself. It's a bit like the digital native collective. There's a legacy there, the 7-year legacy that we've got. But and I think that's lovely, and that is Web3. I think Web3 communities is key.
If there was to be a business model, how does it differ from a normal business model, or is it? We're going to start trying to ideate some of this next week.
Well, actually, I don't know. Like, I think I don't know how a normal business model is, but I think
we just do like compare. But who's your competitor?
So I think I'm a bad example for this, because we've never done a competitor analysis. We've never done like a SWOT, like things that I used to do a lot when I was in uni. But it's important to do so. Like right now we are actually going through, because it's a bit of a like slower market and kind of like, thinking about different things. We actually have done all of these exercises. So like kind of analyzing the competitor ecosystem as a whole, looking, for example, of social media is a big part of, I think, any business right now, like any, especially in Web3. So looking a lot at like how other people, like Evie, you've done like all of the social media analysis about how our competitors kind of like communicate on social media. Yeah, so we did that now after 3 years. I don't know, maybe it would be, I think thinking back, it'd probably be interesting and better to do it before. But at the same time, I wouldn't get too like, yeah, exactly. Also, but I wouldn't get too like focused on these things and almost like then kind of stop you from doing, because if you think about like a digital fashion marketplace, there's loads. Yeah, okay, but so what? It's like there's loads of coffee shops,
Do you think it's a good idea to actually start as a project without needing too much about the business plan?
No, yeah, I don't know. Now I'm like everybody.
I was just going to say that that's not a bad,
Yeah,
not
yeah.
a bad way to go about it, I think, especially because the nature of Web3 and its kind of its ever-changing sort of landscape. I don't think it's a bad thing to take that.
I think that's what most people started at as well within Web3. A lot of people, unless you are kind of like have a VC backing, so like venture capital funding, where you can, you know, go straight in with, I don't know, £5 million worth of funding. A lot of people went at it from the project type of thing. Yeah.
Yes, I do. It's like everyone else is like, let's just do it. Let's just do it. Explore
It's kind
it.
of on
out.
that note, the way that we managed to start BCA residency before we got the grant actually was through a fundraising auction. Obviously selling NFTs and yes, of course, you know, an auction is nothing new, but the process of having to do that in real life would have been probably impossible. Like the kind of like the way that we managed to do it in a really fast, short time, you know, contacting a lot of the artists that we had previously worked with on non-commercial terms, just highlighting their work on all of these videos and blah, blah, blah. And then they offered, you know, their work to be auctioned to support the residency, to kind of get it started. And, you know, that's another application of, yeah, how you can also use, yeah, this ecosystem for raising tools or, yeah, kind of financial models. Yeah. So, well, once the thing leaves, yeah. So this is me. That's my Twitter. That's my email. That's the BCA Twitter and the BCA email. Primarily, Twitter is the best way to get in touch with me. I would
You
say.
can tell you're on. One little thing you're going to take away from today. Have you taken anything away?
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, it's been really interesting to see how, like, people are thinking about Web3 with ideas that have impact on like society, and I think that's great, because I live in a bit of a bubble, which is very focused on, you know, money, and it's not what fires me or fuels me. So I'm you know, it's kind of like interesting to see that the newcomers, you know, whoever is thinking about Web3 now is thinking about it with an impact on society and real life. Yes.
Secret society has become going to out itself here.
Yeah, exactly.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank
See you
you.
Thank you.
next week. Anything you want to say?
Thank you so much for coming.
Aren't they marvelous? What about the best group ever?
Yeah,
We're very engaged. I'm very happy.
lovely. And a big thank you to Kate,
Yeah, thank you, Kate.
Nicole,
Thank you.
and Alyssa, thank you as well for
Thank you.
hosting us. And, yeah, Jessica.
See you next
And
week.
thank you all for coming along. And, yeah.
Thank you.